All right, we are live. So, hello everyone. I'm Sourabhi Dutta Roy, your project lead for the Story Project 12 by www.tellmeyourstory.biz. And I welcome you all to the last episode of the Women Without Names series. I feel extremely privileged to have with us today Alex Denis, Tanushree Poddar, and Aditi Mathur Kumar. Today's topic for the discussion is on armed forces and the Fauji wives. Tell Me a Story calls for submissions or the story prompt, that is, Women Without Names. Registrations are also open for our writing program, season 13. Let me begin now by introducing our panelists for the audience. Alex Denis is a national Maro and 6 times Emmy Award winning journalist. She spent nearly 2 decades reporting on local, state, and national interests, sharing stories that capture major events and make them connect with her audience. She joined the executive leadership team at the Department of Children's in February 2023. Alex is married to a combat veteran infantry officer of both the 101st and 82nd Airborne Divisions. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you.
Right. Our next panelist, Tanushree Poddar, has written over 100 travel tales and 18 novels and traveled to over 40 countries across 6 continents. She writes in multiple genres like historical, military, crime, romance, and paranormal. 3 of her books are soon to be adapted into web series. Tanushree is an intrepid traveler, music lover, and a voracious reader. Welcome, Tanushree.
Thank you, Sourabhi. Nice to be here.
Right. So we will wait until Aditi joins, but let me begin the session by the first question. So I wanted to discuss about like we how we are always so enamored by the glamour of the army uniform and of the glimpse of the rank, but let us discuss about the uncelebrated moments of bravery of the women of the armed forces, who since time they were barred from joining the forces, be the air force, army, or the navy of any nation. So and today they have come a long way creating their own success stories. But along with that, I was also hoping that since performing the job and winning laurels are easily visible, what about the stories of struggles and uncertainties of the families often that go unnoticed? So I'm talking about the army wives, that the men serving the armed forces of a country. So please share your thoughts on and some true stories that inspired you on both the army officials, women army officials, as well as the army wives. Uh, Alex, would you like to begin?
So I had the pleasure of being the commander's wife in my husband's third deployment, his combat tour overseas. That was in Afghanistan. And for me, it was the strength of the women that helped me endure. I did not have children at the time, and so many of them did. And when I watched them essentially be the commander of their family at their house while their husbands were away, because at that time women were not allowed in the infantry. So we were all home while the men were deployed. For me, that is what kept me going, because I thought if all of these women could do this, raise a family, continue to operate and be strong, I have no excuse. It was just me at the time. And for me, that was what was most motivating, because you speak about the women that you don't see, you don't hear. They are out there in the hundreds every day operating just because they love their country, they love their husbands, they support their families. And I'm thankful that I get to bring a voice to what they do today.
Right. Thank you, Alex. Over to you, Tanushree.
I think Alex has made her point very clear. As an army wife, I identify with every little word that she has spoken. An army wife has a very tough life. I would say that most civilians see her as a glorified, woman in movies. Mainly the Bollywood movies depict her as a very glamorous woman attending parties and, just having a very good time. And in fact, they paint such a wrong picture of the entire defense force. My husband has commanded 2 units, and as a commanding officer's wife, I was required to visit the men, their wives, and especially like Alex said, when they were away from their homes, maybe fighting a war or terrorism. And India, as you know, has, more cases of terrorism and terrorist infested states than real wars. We are fighting a battle against, unknown enemy most of the time, and that is more scary than a war. In a war, you know the enemy and you can fight the enemy, but in a case of terrorism, it's all unknown. And that is a time when an army wife faces her most insecure moments, because the husband is away and she has got the entire responsibility of the family. And nowadays most of the women are also holding jobs, so it becomes very difficult for her to handle it all on her own. And, plus have the stress and the insecurity of having her husband at a battlefield with unknown enemies. So it's a very complex situation, and one cannot understand unless one is in the situation as such. And as an army wife, I would say that at least in the Indian Army, most of the army defense personals, not just army, even the others, come from the rural areas. Their wives are from the rural areas. And I have met so many of them who are not even educated. They don't know their rights. So when the husband is, killed in the war, or, dies during a terrorist attack, half the time they don't know how to deal with the situation. And that is where the army wives, the senior army wives, the commander or the CO's wife, have to help them out. So it's like a big responsibility, I would say.
Right. Thank you, Tanushree. Um, Alex, as both an army wife and a journalist, how would you say that you navigate with the identity of being an army wife and that of an independent woman simultaneously? It,
No,
yes, Alex, I think, can't you hear me? Right, I think she might have some network issues. So while she joins, I would like to ask you, Tanushree, about recently I had seen a billboard
yeah, she's back.
somewhere.
I can
Right,
hear you
can you
now. I
hear me, Alex?
apologize.
Yeah, Alex is
Okay.
back.
Okay. Right. So, Tanushree, recently I had seen a billboard somewhere calling for new admissions to the Indian Army. And the tagline on the billboard was something along the lines that it is God's job to forgive our enemies, but it is ours to help them meet. Having said that, army life is glorified in popular culture, be it films or books. So, do you think such representation of the army valor comes with the glorification of war and pushing many families into anonymity? And how did war and their victims deal with this anonymity or identity crisis in your book specifically?
Saurabhi, firstly, I feel that in a country like ours, the army men are not given the due during the peace times as we see now. But most people are unaware of what is happening in the terrorist infested states, so they don't really think that is a war. But basically that is also a kind of a war, wherein there is, lot of stress involved, a lot of risk to lives involved. And what happens ultimately is the families come into limelight only when there is a war and the husband passes away. If he is martyred, then they get honored for just that little time, and thereafter everyone forgets and gets on with their life. So basically the sacrifices of the women are never brought to the fore. No one recognizes how much their contribution is, or what they deserve thereafter. Who looks after them? We just glorify them for that moment, calling them brave women who have, supported their husbands and all. But eventually it's just a 5 minute fame or whatever attention, and then they go back to their villages. Like I mentioned, most of them come from the rural areas. The men, the soldiers, they basically come from the rural areas. Their wives have to go back to the villages and cope with the sudden pressure of the society, wherein they have become widows, And in India, being a widow still is a very big stigma, and you carry a lot of, dark shadows around you, and people do treat you badly. And eventually, I have had, I'll quote one case here that in our unit, it happened once, and the lady, the soldier's wife, was denied all her rights. The money that should have come to him didn't come to her because her in laws tried to take it away. They mistreated her, and she was getting nothing till someone complained to the commanding officer and they intervened. But basically, this is a very common story. The women being deprived of their rights. And now, of course, things have become better because they nominate their wives. But earlier, it wasn't so. So that little glory or whatever you're saying comes for a very brief time, maybe just an award or a medal if she, gets the limelight. Thereafter, there's nothing for her. She has sacrificed everything and got nothing in return. So when we talk about women, we should not just talk about the officers' wives or the city bred people, because the majority of Indian army comes from the rural background. They're agrarian, and they come from a different culture altogether. It's these women that suffer the consequences more than the consequences suffered by the city women or working women or the officers' wives.
Right. And how did war and their victims deal with the anonymity or identity crisis in your books specifically?
Basically, I haven't written about war victims as yet. It's a very it's a sad truth, and it's too close home for me to write about it in a detached manner. I haven't dealt with that till now. Eventually, I will. But I feel there is a lot of pain and a lot of, complexities involved in their dealing with the issue, because the war brings with it a lot of victims, not just the men who die at the battlefield, but their kin, and everyone who is close to him is a victim.
Right. Thank you, Tanushree. Um, Alex, as both an army wife and a journalist, how do you navigate with the identity of being an army wife and that of an independent woman simultaneously when feminist confidence is often perceived as a demanding barrier to the applause and business of nationalism? And have you ever had to sacrifice your own aspirations for the traditions that come along with being, quote unquote, the army wife?
Ooh, that's a good question. I've been very thankful that I have been able to navigate my career alongside my husband's. For us, I felt as though it was a calling for both of us. And we're a very faithful family, and we feel as though it merged together in a beautiful way, that I had empathy in telling stories because I was living it firsthand. But I was always incredibly careful to never cross the information that I had because I was married to him. I was privy to information that the public really shouldn't know. So I made sure that I always had boundaries, and it was very clear in every news station I ever worked for that this is my husband, this is his duty, and my duty is to be an unbiased journalist and to be able to tell the stories. Now, that gave me access because women trusted me to share their stories, and I was able to get onto bases and really tell the nuance in a way that other journalists couldn't relate to. But for us, we walked side by side. I really made sure that they didn't intertwine in a way that would compromise anyone. But for our story, 9/11 happened when we were going into college. And so my husband attended West Point Military Academy, and that was his freshman year. After their freshman year, they can decide, are they going to continue to study or they can drop? Well, of course, patriotism was at its highest. When you talk about the unknown threat of terrorism, everyone was united. It was a beautiful time in our country after such incredible sorrow. And for me, I never once hesitated when he said, I want to stay in and I want to serve. And I said, absolutely, there's no other option. So now how do I help serve you while you are serving? And for me, it was those women. We talk about that unsung hero in that time of their lives and what they're doing. And for me, it was so much of the unknown, because when they first went to war the first time, we were relying on handwritten letters. I was running to the mailbox, in 2005, desperate to hold a letter and to smell it and to look at the stains and wonder, where is he? What is that? how is he? When will I hear from him again? So it was a very, almost like a pause of history where we flashed back to another world war and we were reliving it again before they had all of the technology that were, then established that made it a little bit more easier for us to communicate. But there was a time in his third deployment where I was actually on air in the morning show. I was in Nashville, and I had one of our producers come out and say, "We've got this press release. It looks like something's going on at Fort Campbell." Well, my heart instantly dropped because I knew that was my husband's unit. And I took the paper and I said, "I have to go. I have to go now." So I drove up to the base and we waited for more than a week, day by day, as the names were released of the men that were killed. And that was a very real moment for me where journalism gave me an inside look beforehand at what my husband and his men were experiencing. But when you talk about the strength of the women, I went up there every day and we sat with the family readiness group, we call it the FRG, and we waited day by day for those names to come out. And it was horrifying. And you felt guilty for being thankful that your husband was alive, but also immense sorrow and grief for your friends who you knew would never be able to hug their husbands again. And so it's a very real feeling, to touch on what you were saying, that many people don't experience or know. And then when your husband's return, my husband struggled. He had survivor's guilt. Now I am trying to care for him in a way that I'm not equipped to do. And I'm so excited to welcome him home, but yet I don't have the tools to best support him anymore. We're the only ones that are still married in our unit. We were able to fight through it, but it is an incredible challenge that these women face to cling to their husbands who are returning very different men. And that stays with you, and the war that they leave then comes back to your front door. And you work at it every single day and you're reminded of it. And so for me, I poured myself into my work because I thought I can see and experience things that I know others are feeling who don't have a voice to talk about. And I never had to compromise my work. I felt as though I was always very respected. I felt blessed in that moment. I never fought a feminist blanket. I was never identified as one. I was actually given a lot of platform. And I felt immense responsibility to be able to use that adequately to represent those women who didn't have what I had.
Thank you, Alex, for being so candid with us. Moving on to Tanushree, how would you say that you tried to break gender stereotypes and patriarchal biases when you were writing about the four lady cadets in the Girls in Green, especially because even in fiction you cannot take creative liberties on the rules of the forces, and if you could also read out a short excerpt for our audience.
When I was writing the book, Girls in Green, actually, I chose four girls from four different regions of the country. And one of them belongs to Haryana, which is one of the most backward, you know, they're more patriarchal, right, rather, I would say. And there is little acceptance of women who try to, break the gender boundaries. And for that matter, the girl uh, who's actually a player, she's an athlete, and she decides to become an army officer. So she had to fight a lot of battles against the social norms. And in fact, she kept it secret. When she applied, she didn't tell her parents. And it was only her grandfather who actually helped her. And the grandfather was an ex army man himself. So he trained her in secret and helped her fill the form and did everything. And only when she got selected, even then, she did not, really reveal till a later date when she had to just move out to the unit. So this was a girl who was very brave. She was stepping out of the boundaries, and that was a very big thing for her. So she's one of the main characters, you can say, out of the four she has, because in the end she goes on to win the Sword of Honor. And when her father comes to visit her in the academy, he tells her, means when everyone tries to convince him that no, no, it's okay, she is very good and she'll make it and all. So he makes a promise that if you bring the Sword of Honor home, I'll forgive you. So it becomes doubly, she's under double pressure to bring back the sword of honor, perform, prove herself. And, that kind of a challenge. And of course, she does it all because she's determined. And that's how I have portrayed her. And the other girl who is from Maharashtra, she thinks it's all very cushy because she's a movie, you know, fan, and she has watched it all on the movie. She sees handsome men in uniform and she thinks it's a very nice life. So she joins army thinking it's going to be a lark. And what she faces there is something, she just couldn't imagine. So these are four very different characters, and one of them goes to the academy because her fiance is there, and she's very competitive. She wants to prove herself, you know, that she's better than him. So, and they had grown up together since childhood and they were always competing with each other. So she joins the academy. And the fourth girl is a lawyer by profession, but she's from the Northeast, where the representation from there is very poor in the women's army as of the date that we started recruiting them. So she wants to be one of the first, and she joins as the JAG, that is the army branch of legal branch. So this is about the almost the last chapter when they are about to pass out, just before the POP. In her room, Lucky jumped out of the bed, ready to embrace the day. Tucked in her smart uniform, not a hair out of place, she stood before the mirror, adjusting her peaked cap that added a special touch to one's personality. Tightening the belt, she admired herself for a few seconds. A resolute and muscular girl with determination stared back at her. Gone was the naive and the starry eyed girl from Shillong. I have come a long way, she sighed. Her dream had come true. As she stepped toward the door to make an exit, Shiny paused for a couple of minutes to look around her room. It held countless memories, both good and bad. She ran loving fingers over her desk. It had seen her stooped for hours over her lessons, many of them frustrating. At the center of the room was a bed on which the four girls had spent hours complaining and planning, and the closet that held so many secrets. Nutty stood near the door, staring back at her room, strange emotions tugging her heart. This was the room where the gang had gathered many times to celebrate successes or mourn failures. Cheering and consoling each other, the friends had been the crutches that helped her walk the long and tough path. In a short while, she would have to leave this room forever. Another young girl would occupy it, dreaming the same dreams, sometimes crying with frustration, sometimes laughing with elation. Would she be mischievous? Would she be daring? Or would she be ambitious? Wondered the girl from Jalna. Drawing a deep breath, she turned. It was time to go. A little later, having collected the rifles from the armory, the cadets waited behind a wall at the Parmeshwaran drill square, the ground where they had banged and stamped their blistered feet for hours on end. It was the same parade ground, the same cadets, the same ustads, the same rifles, but the day was special.
Thank you, Tanushree. That was a wonderful excerpt. Um, moving on to Alex, I wanted to talk about the concept of home, since home is always a basis that frames our identity. But how does an army wife frame her identity and that of her children too, since one a partner in the marriage is either absent most of the time, or the family has to continuously shift the base, aligning to the husband's transfers? And what kind of problems does a family face with such military relocations and transfers?
Well, I think what they do is framed by the way your family frames it, right? So many of us become the fabric of our lives and the way in the experiences. So for the closest friends that I have had who have had children who have had to hop from base to base to base, it's an adventure. It is new people, new places, new experiences, and it makes them more worldly. You are interacting with people, sometimes foreign soldiers. that you don't ever have the exposure to if you stay in your one small town. So I think it's really the lens in which you view it and you communicate it to your children. Because on the flip side, you see some children who hate to have to leave, because that is a reality. You don't really truly have roots because your roots are planted throughout the entire country. And that can be challenging. I think for me, from the military life perspective, it was challenging for my job because I could never really dig in because we were moving every couple of years. It worked with journalism because you usually sign a 2 to 3 year contract, but many a times we lived apart, not because of his base, but because I had to go somewhere else where the job was. So we were married, and 3 or 4 years in, we hadn't lived in the same place. We were long distance, which didn't work when we had children, which was part of the reason why we decided that we were going to pivot and change. But it is a complicated factor when you think about the fact that so many women must work to be able to afford to live these days. The military salary at one point, while you have housing and you have all of these stipends, isn't always enough to sustain what we need to do in our country when we see prices are rising for gas and food and living, the necessities. And so it's the community on the base, which is a wonderful plug-in that gives you some sort of stability, but that stability changes from place to place. What's wonderful about the fabric of the women in the military is they instantly allow you to plug in. It is a little sorority everywhere you go. They are living the same life as you. And, the nuances are different, but really they can relate. So as you go from base to base, they're like, come on, sister, join in. Bring your kids. We're all doing carpool. And without that, I don't think that the military could sustain. And, you think about the women who are in uniform and also having to do that, because now we have so many women who choose to join. And it's that dichotomy of, I'm also a mother. I'm also really running the house because, I love my husband, but I'm keeping the schedule and keeping it running and moving. And they wear so many hats and they wear them well. But I think it's all about exposure in the way that you frame what that experience is going to be like. But because for me, I look back at that time in our lives and it's some of my favorite times. I met people from all walks of life, all experiences, and the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. And our bonds and our relationships, even though we were together for such a short amount of time, sustain a lifetime, because what you're going through in some instances are tragedy. You're tragedy bonded. And other times you are so elated because you're welcoming home your loved one and then you've celebrated that together. So it forms you in a way that you can't ever replicate outside of that life, because it is such a different lifestyle that if you don't live it, you just don't know it.
Thank you,
Actually, I
Alan.
would like to add something here. Saurabhi, if time permits, I would like to add
Yes,
something here
sure, 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 sure.
about setting up base. And so there was this place called Hatigor. It is in a remote part of Assam. And we were posted there. There was no market. It was total forest. And the elephant herds used to come there. We used to live in houses known as bashas, which had bamboo matting and just about 3 feet of concrete, and above that was bamboo matting. The walls were bamboo. The roof was just a false roof with a double kind of a thing with a tin shed. And the elephants would come in big herds. And at night, we could hear, the villagers. There was a village, very close to this thing. They would light those torches, the fire torches, the ancient ones. We call it mashal. And you would light that to scare the elephants away, and they would start beating the plates with the spoons to create as much din as possible.
Wow.
It was really, really scary. And this place, the power would, almost every day, there would be no power after it was, sunset. So there would be hours of darkness, and there was this. We used to have leeches and scorpions and snakes. Snakes are all kinds all around because there were tea gardens around. And then the elephants would arrive, and it used to really make you feel panicky. I used to sit on the bed. I refused to get down from the bed, thinking, what if I step on a snake or a, scorpion? And then I was pregnant. I couldn't go for any checkups because the nearest army hospital was about 15 kilometers of rough road. So I went once, and the gynae said, please don't come anymore because there's more danger if you come traveling all the way.
Wow.
So I did not have a checkup till I was, 6, 7 months gone. And it was really a very funny life. And I remember one night we were just sitting after dinner, and I was in my house coat and with my feet up. And then suddenly my husband comes and says, come on, let's move out of the house. I said, why? At this time of the night, it was almost 9 p.m. He said, yes, come immediately. I said, I'm not dressed. He says, doesn't matter. There's no time. He dragged me out, and we went to another place, another far off neighbor's house, because the houses were very far from each other. Then I got to know there was a huge mammoth elephant right behind our house. And, when these elephants came, they would just knock down houses because it was just made of bamboo matting kind of a thing. Those were the scariest months of my life. And if I relate it today in the cities, no one can even believe what kind of life we have sometimes to lead. And these are the houses, we make them pleasant, we entertain there, we live there, we make them happy places. So when you say setting up houses, shifting from base to base, we live in such houses. And then we get allotted something in the city if we are lucky enough to move there, where you get a proper accommodation. So your curtains have to be let down or pulled up, and you have to redo everything all over again. So you lead a very unstable life in a way, but you make attempts, and all your creativity comes to the fore. The army unit is like a family. There's so much bonding, like Alex mentioned. We all are together all the time
Mhm.
in grief or happiness, or moments of joy or celebrations, and we celebrate each and every little opportunity, so that we forget where we are and the tragic circumstances that may overtake our lives. So we just make it a point to celebrate anniversaries, birthdays, or anything. Just have parties, celebrate as long as you can, you know. So you live with another philosophy, live for the day.
Yes.
And that's the most beautiful part of experiencing the hardships, that you learn to deal with them, and you learn to cope and live for the day, for the moment, and enjoy each moment.
Hmm. Beautifully said.
Thank you, Tanushree. It was a wonderful story, the experience that you just shared. Um, Moving on, I was also hoping that we could talk about the war widows, since war widows have existed throughout history, and each time have been treated as the supreme examples of sacrifices. Would you say that such goddess-like sacrifice deny the basic human rights to these women and shove them even more towards anonymity? Uh, Tanushree, would you like to?
Like I mentioned earlier, that these women who make such sacrifices, and they live such insecure lives, living moment to moment, when they lose their loved one, it's very difficult for them psychologically, physically, and emotionally, to battle with the entire sequence of things that fall upon their shoulders, whether it is their families, their children. And like I mentioned, most of our men come from the rural areas where they get married very early in life, and sometimes their wives are just in early 20s, and they also have children. So under such circumstances, imagine, say, a 20 something woman just beginning her life, suddenly finding herself as a widow
Mhm.
and bringing up the children. So we do treat them like, goddesses for a minute, maybe. In their village, they become very important for that particular moment. But the consequences and the, results thereafter, are something which, are very difficult to face, because no one stands with anyone forever. So she has to gather the bits of her life and get on with it, to the best of her capability. Today, of course, a lot of women are educated, they're getting, jobs, and they're trying to fend for themselves. But let's not forget that they still have to live within the shackles of the society and deal with these circumstances, which in real life are nothing like what we glamorize or what we, talk about in movies or books or whatever. It's very, very different. It's a very stark and tragic life. It is nothing like what we, imagine it to be. So that's how I see it. And the more we do for them, the less it is. And there really isn't a hand they can hold on to for long. Because see, in the unit, when they are there, we are there to take care. When the CO's wife takes care of these women, and even the other officers' wives, we generally go to their houses. We talk about hygiene, we talk about education. In fact, in my unit, I took them to the banks, taught them how to open accounts,
Good.
and such basic things. We made booklets wherein their rights were mentioned, so that they could fight for their rights later if the circumstances alter. But this is very little. There's not that much that we can do. But of course, we should be doing much more.
May I actually add on to that? Do we have time?
Yes, please, Alex. Sure.
Okay. What I would love to see change in our country is these gold star, we call them, they're the families of the gold stars, so the lost, right? These women, if they remarry, they lose the death benefit from their husband. So I almost feel as though we further penalize the gold star families and those wives, because if they fall in love again and they go to get remarried, they lose the benefits that help their children go to school and to sustain their life. And so we almost further penalize them for moving on with their lives, because if they live in this ambiguity that they continue to miss and love and be a single mother, they then receive their benefits. And so for me, I feel as though that is something that needs to change. Their husbands fought, they gave their lives. That is what they earned for their family to be able to sustain. And for us to say you must live in this sadness for the rest of your life in order to receive that death benefit, for me, I would rather be taxed more and pay more money to make sure that they would be able to receive that benefit and move on with their life if they so choose. Right. But I always have mothers of children in widows who will say to me, oh, I would love to be able to move on. I would love to be able to get remarried. And some, they live with someone else and they love them and they stay engaged for years and years until their child is 18 so that they can continue to receive benefits. But for me personally, I feel that's unfair. And I'd love to see
Absolutely.
that change.
Right. Absolutely, Alex. Moving on, lastly, I wanted to know about the gendered consequences in the context of war and peace. Please also share your thoughts on the silent ranks of the army wives. Alex?
Especially my country, I would venture to say that people don't understand how precious peace is. We often live in peace, even when there is discord, we are still in a peaceful society overall. And I notice that we take that for granted. And that is sad to me, because when you live in a family that is experiencing that strife firsthand because they are overseas, whether they are in a supportive effort to a country who is trying to fight for their rights, or whether it is us because terrorism has come knocked on our door and we are responding, it's less than 1% of our population that actually lives and experiences that. So for me, peace is so precious and I do not take it for granted. And I hear the stories of, elephants coming while you're pregnant and you can't get to a doctor's office. So I moved from one town to another town and I put up new drapes. And still, I can't even comprehend that there are women around the world that is their life. So we always need to be reminded of that the war that we fight is for our freedom, and a freedom that we should never take for granted. and infrastructure and a society and a democracy and an equality that while we still need work, it's something that we have a precious right to. And I think the women who stand by the men that have fought for that understand that and don't ever forget that. And I would say that that's what I would urge people to remember, that we wake up and we live and we breathe and we think about all the things of the day and social media and our houses and this and that, the other, while some people in the world are just looking for fresh water. It's a perspective that I think has come into our family and that we try to teach to our children, because again, we live in such a privileged society. And so I guess that's what I would say is I will never, ever take that for granted.
Right. Thank you, Alex. Over to you, Tanushree.
I agree 100% with what Alex said. I think no one, you know, values peace as much as the army people themselves. We do understand the, basic tenet of life, that is live a peaceful life so that there are no wars, there are no lost lives, because no life is repressible. It is, a sad truth, but war doesn't benefit anyone, neither me nor the enemy country. So we do understand. And whether one admits or not, it's the women who suffer more. The men, yes, they enlist because of various reasons, maybe patriotism, maybe economical, financial constraints, or whatever. But the families they leave behind suffer more, I think. And the silent warriors, as I call the wives, we lend so much support without our psychological, physical, being the man himself, knowing that there is someone to care for their family and the kids, is at peace when he goes for a battle. And it is her responsibility to see that he doesn't suffer any sort of, disturbance in his mind when he goes out. And that's a very hard job, to hide your feelings, to hide the difficulties that she's facing, and just pose with a smile when you're sending him off is, I think, the most difficult thing. And not to cry, because that'll tear him apart. So it's just because of the support that women give that men can fight. So the women, they suffer when the husband is at war. They suffer if he dies, and they suffer more because the children miss the father so much. And like Alex said, if they cannot remarry, I think that's the most unfair part of the deal. And in our society, at least in India, remarriages in rural areas unheard of. It's different in the cities, but in the rural areas, it just isn't possible.
Mhm.
And in a section of society where we are educated, we are, progressive, we can still talk about remarriages. But in a village scenario where they're dealing with so much patriarchy, it just cannot be even, thought about. So they face the maximum brunt of the war. And I think it is time we thought about their part, because we are able to take care of ourselves, our rights. We can fend for ourselves in some way or the other, financially, even psychologically. We are stronger, I think, because we have certain securities around us. We know that, okay, if something happens, I can take care of myself and my children. But the same is not true for the others. And I feel a lot of empathy for these women, and I've seen it from close quarters, so I know what it is like.
I would also add, though, if you wouldn't mind, that it was still the greatest honor of my life. Even with all of that, I felt as though, while I wasn't brave enough to put on the uniform and serve, that was my service, was if I could be that supportive, stable force for my family. In a sense, that was my service to my country. And that's what I knew that I could do, and I could do it well. And I vowed to commit to do that and to give my husband support. So for me, even all of my accolades and what I've done in journalism, I would hands down say that has been the greatest honor of my life.
Right. Thank you, Alex. And thank you, Tanushree. With that, we come to the end of today's session. Thank you once again to Alex and Tanushree for this very insightful conversation and, of course, for your time this evening. Please allow me to remind you that Tell Me Your Story is calling for submissions on the story prompt, that is, Women Without Names. Registrations are also open for the writing program season 13. We hope to hear from you soon. Till then, stay well, stay happy. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Lovely meeting you people.
Same.
Bye. Bye, everyone who's listening in and, putting up their valuable time there. Thank you.